If you watched my GPU buyer's guide for Q1 2017 and were disappointed because of what the AMD cards on the market were doing to secondhand prices, this video ain't gonna make you happy either. So let us take a look at what we know about Ryzen thus far. It would appear that everything from the R7 1800X all the way at the top down to the R3 1100 has been covered, priced, clock pegged, turbo pegged, anal pegged, every sort of pegged. We seem to know IPC as well. There have been a ton of benchmarks that have been either leaked by AMD or have been posted by third-party sources with engineering samples that all seem to suggest that we're looking at about Broadwell IPC. And now, as of today, I think, or yesterday, we now have die shots as well, so we know how these things are constructed, and that actually raises some interesting questions as well. But everything looks good. They did cut some corners, it would seem. This is not a very AVX-heavy chip, which is interesting. AVX instructions have not necessarily been fully leveraged, I think, by the software community yet. They're not really relevant to gaming and even to content creation. You never know, when the benchmarks come out, we'll see. But for the average person who's just mainly looking to game or stream, these are undoubtedly a godsend. AMD, it looks to be pushing the market forward by increasing core count twofold, and this time for real. None of this bulldozer bullshit where they went with the 4-core, 8-thread sort of thing where they had a module that was split in half and shared a floating point unit. No. This looks like 8 real cores that are real and legit. The only thing I think that has yet to be addressed is the overclocking potential of these chips, which of course is a big question mark. We've seen this before from AMD, where they've sort of released everything and been like, yeah, look at how competitive we are. They did it back in 2009 with the Phenom 2 series. And then when the chips came to market, people couldn't overclock them for shit, couldn't even get them past 4 gigahertz in some cases. That disappointed a lot of enthusiasts. So that could still happen. We could still have some very stunted chips in that regard, but given the process they were manufactured on, I really don't think that's a huge concern. So anyway, now that we have all that information set, it's up to people like me to look at the SKU list and determine which of these chips are threats at given price points to people like me who deal in secondary market hardware. And let's go over a few of these right now, and I'll demonstrate to you just how tight things are about to get. So let's start at near the top, because at the very top there is no real secondhand comparison. The R7 1800X is an 8-core 16-thread CPU that pretty much sits alone. It is designed to compete with the i7 6900K, and it looks like it's going to do so successfully. AMD does not have a 10-core offering to compete with the 6950X, so this is not really a concern for people like me, but still seems like a really good buy. Even the top binned one, which is $499 US, is half the price of the fucking Broadwell equivalent, which is insane. So let's go down a peg. Let's go down to the 6-core 12-thread CPUs, of which there are a few secondhand alternatives you can pick up for relatively little money by comparison to what Intel was offering prior to Zen's upcoming release. I did some scouring of my own records, my records of negotiations, which may or may not have been fruitful, and my records of actual purchases that I've made. I searched eBay prices and Kijiji prices locally here in Toronto, all prices in Canadian dollars, and the closest performing equivalent I could find to the R7 1600X, which is a 6-core, 12-thread, unlocked, XFR-enabled chip, which is something new that AMD is touting as being like a micro-automatic overclocking kind of thing that happens during operation, was the i7 4930K. I found a couple of people, and these are people that have system teardowns. They have multiple copies of these chips, and I was able to negotiate a price of $420 from these people. I did not pick them up, but that's as low as they would go. It's the lowest that I could find. Maybe you can do better on eBay. I did find a couple that ended up selling for the 350 to 380 range, but you're looking at an Ivy Bridge LGA 2011 socket i7, and the R7 1600X comes in at 339 Canadian dollars if we're just doing a raw conversion from the cited US dollar price into Canadian. So you're talking about $80 fucking more to get a second-hand Ivy Bridge CPU with the same number of cores and threads. It's clocked a touch higher at base and turbo, which is probably going to make up at least somewhat for the gap in IPC and the differences in architecture. The average i7 4930K usually sat around 4.4, maybe 4.5 gigahertz when overclocked. But all that is just if you're comparing these on a blow-for-blow basis. But what you have to remember is that the i7 still uses DDR3 on the X79 platform. The motherboards are ridiculously expensive. They're probably not going to be covered under warranty anymore unless it's a really high-end motherboard that had like a 5-year warranty. If you're going to buy a motherboard to support that chip secondhand, it's going to take you a while to find, and it's not going to be cheap. All of these things combined just make going for even Ivy or Sandy Bridge, or even if you can find a cheap Haswell alternative, it's just not worth it. Instead, you get yourself a relatively inexpensive AM4 motherboard with one of the upper chipsets that allow for overclocking. You pay your $339 to get the best binned version of the 6-core chip, mind you, and there are lower ones that are cheaper, and you're set. There's just no secondhand alternative right now based on today's prices that can possibly compete with what AMD is going to be offering. I cannot remember a time that's ever happened before where I've just been like, oh, I guess I'm just going to have to not buy parts for a month. Next up down the list, and this is where the comparisons get a lot more interesting because we're getting into Intel consumer socket range. So this is where clocks are going to be able to be pushed a little bit higher. Consumer chips are usually better for that because they have limited number of cores. Overclockability is going to be a little higher. But we have the R5 1400X, which is a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, 8 megs of cache, base 3.5, turbo 3.9, overclocking unknown, going up against what I picked to be the best secondhand alternative that closely compares to this chip, the i7 3770K, which you can pick up for about $260 as well here in Canada, depending on your luck and where you look. Same number of cores, same number of threads, same amount of cache rather. Actually, same base and turbo clock as well. Is that right? 3.5 and 3.9? Maybe I wrote that down wrong. But anyway, very close on paper, these chips. Of course, different architectures, which is the big difference. Ivy Bridge is going to be a considerable amount slower than what we're going to see in Ryzen, which is equivalent to Broadwell, but not that bad. You're only looking at about a 10 to 12% drop, depending on what you measure with and how you measure. The 3770Ks averaged, I would say, 4.6 or 4.7 overclocks across the board. Some people were able to get 4.8s and 4.9s, but the TIM with Ivy Bridge and with Haswell, the first generation, were both really bad, and they were temperature limited for sure. You had to have some great cooling to make these things work. Again, we're looking at same price, a little worse performance at stock, and you're going with a secondhand motherboard that's not going to be particularly cheap. They're no longer under warranty. You don't know how long they're going to last for. You're on DDR3 memory, and once again, the incentive to buy secondhand here. The main reason you buy secondhand here is to save money, and in this fucking formula, in this market, this equation, there simply is no room to save money. Let's go down even further. Let's go down to the R5 1200X, which is the, again, top binned quad-core, quad-thread offering that Ryzen will bring to market. 8 megs of cache, 3.4 base, 3.8 turbo, unknown OC potential, hard to say. I found several i5 4690Ks for the 220, 230 range. The cheapest one I was able to snag over the last 6 months was $200. Again, 4 cores, 4 threads, 6 megabytes of cache, and 3.5, 3.9 at stock. I have owned several 4690Ks. My average OC on them is about 4.6. Your mileage may vary. But if this R5 1200X can match or surpass that, again, where's your secondhand option? I mean, you could go a little lower. You could look at maybe Ivy Bridge for about $175. That's what I've got listed here on my spreadsheet for the going 3570K price. You can go a step further back. You can maybe get Sandy Bridge. Sandy Bridge chips you can pick up for $8,200. But again, motherboards are older. They're getting more expensive, harder to find. DDR3, no warranty. All this stuff, these things you have to consider. So ultimately, even if you do slum it, even if you do sacrifice all that IPC gain that you get going from something like Sandy up to Ryzen, which is a significant amount, even if you just ditch all of that and say, I can live without that, you're still only saving maybe, what, $100 to go down to Sandy Bridge? Not very good if you're in the market to build your own personal rig out of used stuff. But let's say $120 isn't even in your budget. You know, you don't even want to get an i5 2500K with a Hyper 212 Evo and a motherboard for like 180 bucks and go to town on that. Let's say you want to go super cheap, like some of the things that I build here on the channel. The i5 2400 has been a go-to CPU of mine. It's got 4 cores, 4 threads, Sandy Bridge architecture, 6 megs, Vel 3 cache. I've actually got some Cinebench numbers here just for comparison's sake, because this is not going to be about Ryzen. I'm talking about a single-threaded R15 score of 118 and a 435 R15 score multi-threaded. So 118, 435, it's still a solid CPU for what it is. You compare it with a lot of formerly mid-range, now sort of low-end graphics cards like the GTX 660 Ti. Have a very good gaming experience, absolutely, there's no question about it. But like I said, this is about the $80 price point for me. That's what I pay for these CPUs, or at least what I paid for these CPUs, and that won't be happening anymore because the G4560 from Intel came along and sort of kicked it out of the market already. It's the first Pentium that Intel has enabled hyperthreading on, despite the fact that it has no AVX support. It seems to be a very comparable comparison to your average locked i3, and is shaking up the marketplace, needless to say. Now, of course, there's no direct comparison between the i5 2400 and this because they do have a different core count, but the R15 Cinebench scores that I recorded from my 4560 were 145 single-threaded and 365 multi. So again, better single-threaded performance because, of course, newer architecture and higher clocks. Slightly lower, but still very comparable multi-threaded performance. So even in games that are optimized for 4 cores, this thing isn't going to get you all the way there, probably, but it's going to get you close. And when you consider the warranty period, you're considering how obviously accessible H110 motherboards are, and how available DDR4 RAM is, and how relatively inexpensive it is, I can't really justify going with the older option right now. So what does all this ultimately mean for people like me? Is my side business over and is my channel going to shut down? No. What it means is if you are hoarding, if you are stockpiling, the time to sell is now before prices drop, and they will drop. Get up your cash stockpiles, wait till the summer when prices normalize, and then you swoop in. Then you start getting those i5 2400s for $40, $50. Anyway, this topic I think has been satisfactorily humped and dumped. Follow me on Twitter at Ofa, check out the Steam group, and giveaway details will be coming this weekend. I'm going to be filming a short video with all the details about how you can get Steam keys, which I will be giving away once again for my 5,000 subscriber thing. I've just had a busy week. It's coming. Don't worry, guys, I promise. Also, my next video will feature a build. I couldn't feature it this time because I have 3 builds lined up. They're each missing one specific part. And all 3 of them should be pretty interesting, actually. Especially, there's one in particular I won't spoil, but I've got a small form factor thing in the works that I'm really excited to just play around with. Once again, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you again in a couple days, probably.